It appeared like lightning in a storm. Not a whisper, not a rumor, but a shockwave that tore through the skies of 1944. The Messerschmitt Me 262, Germany's jet-powered Predator, was unlike anything the world had ever seen. While Allied pilots still flew propeller-driven Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and Spitfires, the Luftwaffe unveiled something that looked and moved like it had come from the future. German pilots laughed at first. They mocked their enemies. "What hope do the Allies have?" they said. "Their aircraft crawl through the sky like insects. Ours will slice through them like steel through paper." And who could argue? The Me 262 could fly at nearly 900 kilometers per hour, faster than anything in the air. Its twin Junkers Jumo 004 jet engines screamed with a fury that no piston engine could match. Armed with 4 30mm cannons, it could rip through bomber formations in seconds, shredding bombers that once seemed untouchable. But here's the question. Was the Me 262 truly unstoppable, or was it a weapon born too late to save a collapsing empire? Imagine the shock of an Allied pilot on patrol. One moment the sky is quiet. The next, a blur flashes past so quickly his eyes can barely track it. He pulls his Mustang into a dive, straining every rivet, but it's useless. The Me 262 is already gone. How do you fight an enemy you can't even catch? And yet, behind the awe there was doubt. The jet engines were fragile, prone to flameouts and breakdowns. The aircraft required careful handling. And the Luftwaffe was running out of trained pilots to master its strange, futuristic machine. So the story of the Me 262 is not a simple tale of dominance. It is a paradox. A weapon of unimaginable speed and power, born into a world that no longer had the resources to wield it. The Allies laughed too at first. They said the Me 262 was overcomplicated, unreliable, nothing more than a desperate gamble by a regime already crumbling. But laughter, like arrogance, never lasts long in war. Because once the jet roared into combat, once it tore through bomber streams and left propeller fighters helpless in its wake, no one was laughing anymore. This is not just the story of a plane. It is the story of ambition colliding with desperation, of technology racing against time, of a machine that could have changed history, if only it had arrived sooner. The Messerschmitt Me 262. The world's first jet fighter. Feared, envied, misunderstood. And for those who underestimated it, the last sound they heard was the scream of its engines. By 1942, the skies over Europe no longer belonged to Germany. The Luftwaffe, once feared as an unstoppable force, was bleeding. Allied bombers pounded cities and factories by day, leaving smoldering ruins in their wake. At night, British squadrons lit the horizon with incendiaries. The war that Hitler once promised would be swift and decisive had turned into a battle of endurance, and Germany was losing. The men of the Luftwaffe knew it. Every mission seemed to cost more lives than the one before. Every returning pilot carried the weight of comrades lost in flames. They watched as formations of B-17 Flying Fortresses and Lancaster bombers filled the sky, escorted by P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts. The message was clear. The Allies could outbuild, outfly, and outlast them. So what could change the tide? Was there a miracle left to save Germany's skies? Engineers in Augsburg thought they had the answer. Deep inside Messerschmitt's facilities, a radical idea was taking shape. Propulsion not by propeller but by jet. It was an idea long discussed in theory but never realized in combat. The concept promised speed beyond imagination, enough to outrun and outfight anything the Allies had. The machine they envisioned would become the Messerschmitt Me 262, the world's first operational jet fighter. But miracles do not come easily. From the start, the project was plagued with doubt. Traditionalists within the Luftwaffe laughed at the idea. A jet? Too complicated. Too dangerous. It will never fly in combat. Even as test models left the runway, skeptics insisted it was a waste of precious time and resources. And above them all, Adolf Hitler cast a shadow that nearly doomed the program entirely. Obsessed with offense, Hitler demanded that the Me 262 be developed not as a fighter but as a bomber. He wanted a blitz bomber capable of striking London and retreating before defenses could react. Engineers protested. It was designed as a fighter, and forcing it into a bomber role would cripple its potential. But in the hierarchy of the Reich, protest meant little. Months were wasted redesigning for Hitler's fantasy while Allied bombs continued to fall. Meanwhile, the clock ticked louder. Imagine the frustration of the engineers who saw the future in their hands, yet were shackled by politics. Imagine the pilots, desperate for any advantage, hearing rumors of a jet that could outrun Mustangs, only to wait in vain as production crawled. But despite the obstacles, the Me 262 began to take form. Twin Junkers Jumo 004 jet engines gave it thrust that no piston aircraft could match. Its sleek, swept-wing design looked alien compared to the stubby fighters of the day. The cockpit bristled with four 30mm 108 Malawian Quachas cannons, each capable of ripping apart a heavy bomber with a handful of rounds. On paper it was unstoppable. And in 1943, the first successful flights silenced some of the laughter. Pilots climbed into the strange new machine expecting failure. Instead, they were thrown back into their seats as the jet surged forward with power no propeller could match. They landed shaken, breathless, their eyes wide. "It's like riding a thunderbolt," one test pilot confessed. Yet even then doubts remained. The engines wore out after only a few dozen hours. Fuel was scarce. Maintenance was a nightmare. Could such a fragile machine survive the brutal reality of war? As 1944 dawned, Germany faced its darkest skies yet. The Allies were preparing for the invasion of Normandy. Day and night, bombers filled the heavens, reducing entire cities to rubble. Luftwaffe veterans, once the pride of Europe, were now being slaughtered by the thousands. If ever there was a moment for the Me 262 to prove itself, this was it. So the question remained, hanging heavy in every hangar, in every briefing room, in every heart. Would the jet arrive in time? For the pilots, hope flickered. For the engineers, determination burned. And for the world, the Me 262 was about to leap from theory into history. When the Me 262 finally emerged from prototype into combat readiness, it was as if a creature from another era had stepped into the war. Most fighters of World War II shared a common silhouette: a nose with a propeller, wings straight and sturdy, engines that roared with a piston-steady rhythm. But the Me 262 looked alien. Its sleek, swept wings curved like the blade of a knife. Its fuselage tapered with predatory precision. And instead of the familiar thrum of propellers, it screamed with the piercing howl of jet turbines. Pilots called it Schwalbe, the swallow, because of its streamlined shape. But its prey would call it something else entirely: death arriving too fast to fight. At its heart were the Junkers Jumo 004 engines. They were both miracle and curse. Each produced over 1,800 pounds of thrust, catapulting the Me 262 to speeds no piston fighter could hope to match. With afterburner bursts, it could exceed 870 kilometers per hour, nearly 200 faster than the vaunted P-51 Mustang. Against a Spitfire or Thunderbolt, the Swallow wasn't just faster. It was untouchable. And the weapons? Brutal. Four 108 Malawian Quachas cannons, 30mm each, mounted in the nose. Their rate of fire wasn't high, but they didn't need to be. A single shell could shatter a bomber's wing. 2 or 3 could rip a flying fortress apart. Imagine being a B-17 crewman, looking out from your turret and seeing a silver blur streaking straight at you. A blink later, your formation explodes with shells detonating like sledgehammers. But perhaps the greatest terror wasn't just the firepower, it was the speed of the attack. Allied gunners were trained to track targets, to lead their fire, to anticipate angles. Against the Me 262 there was no anticipation. It appeared, fired, and vanished before their fingers even tightened on the trigger. And yet, the Me 262's brilliance carried hidden flaws. The Jumo engines were fragile, their turbines prone to failure after only 25 flying hours. Pilots had to nurse them carefully, too much throttle too quickly, and the engines would flame out or catch fire. Allied air forces, once they realized this, spread the word: catch them on takeoff. Catch them on landing. Catch them when their weakness is exposed. But in the air, mid-combat? The Me 262 was a nightmare. The Allies experienced it firsthand in the summer of 1944. Imagine a Mustang squadron escorting bombers over Germany. They spot a formation ahead, but before they can react, jets slash through their lines faster than bullets. A pilot shouts into his radio, "They're too fast. I can't even turn to chase them." By the time the Mustangs dive, the 262s are already specks on the horizon. For the first time since the war began, Allied pilots felt what it was like to be outclassed. They had been used to superior numbers, superior tactics, and eventually superior machines. Now, in an instant they were the ones struggling to keep up. German pilots reveled in it. After years of attrition and despair, they finally had a weapon that gave them back the initiative. They mocked the Allies, saying, "The war in the air belongs to us again. Nothing can touch the Swallow." But how true was that boast? The Me 262 was a marvel, yes. But marvels need numbers, and Germany no longer had them. Each aircraft took precious resources to build, resources the Reich was running out of. Every sortie strained the logistics of an exhausted nation. And yet, when those sleek black crosses appeared against the sun, carving through bomber streams at speeds no prop plane could match, every Allied pilot knew, this was no laughing matter. The Me 262 was not just a machine. It was a glimpse of the future. But would the future arrive soon enough to change the present? The Me 262 entered combat with swagger. Luftwaffe pilots, once battered and demoralized, suddenly felt like gods of the air again. They had speed no enemy could touch, firepower that shredded bombers, and a machine that looked invincible. Around mess halls and airfields they laughed openly. The Americans? The British? Let them come. Their propeller toys cannot chase shadows. Confidence surged, and with it came arrogance. Imagine the scene, a formation of B-17s lumbering across the Rhine, their gunners scanning the skies for enemy fighters. They're used to spotting Focke-Wulfs or Messerschmitt Bf-109s diving in from above. But today it's different. Out of nowhere, a blur streaks through the formation at twice the speed of anything they've seen. Explosions tear through 3 bombers before anyone can react. What was that? A gunner screams. The answer comes back in disbelief. It's a jet. For those first missions, the Me 262 was like a phantom blade cutting through Allied steel. Pilots bragged of kills so easy it felt unfair. We strike, we vanish. They cannot follow. But war has a way of humbling arrogance. The Allies adapted quickly. Intelligence reports poured in. The new German jet was fast, yes, but fragile. Its Jumo engines took precious minutes to spool up to full power. On takeoff, the Me 262 was sluggish, crawling down the runway like prey before its wings caught air. On landing, it slowed to a crawl, coasting down long strips of tarmac, exposed and vulnerable. American strategists gave new orders. Don't chase them in the sky. Catch them when they're weak. Squadrons of Mustangs began circling near airfields, waiting like wolves at a riverbank. And soon the hunter became the hunted. Picture Lieutenant Karl Reinhardt, a young Luftwaffe ace flush with confidence, boasting to his comrades before a sortie, "The Allies call us lightning. Today they will only see thunderclouds of their own bombers falling." He laughed as he strapped in, the Me 262 vibrating under his hands, engines spooling with that otherworldly shriek. He soared into the sky, overtook his squadron mates, and spotted a column of B-24s. Diving in, he unleashed his cannons, blowing one bomber apart instantly. Adrenaline surged. "They can't stop me," he shouted. But as Reinhardt pulled back toward his base, fuel running low, his confidence faltered. A Mustang squadron had been waiting. Their leader spotted him descending. "That's our chance. Hit him before he touches the runway." The Mustangs pounced. Reinhardt pushed his throttle forward, but the engines screamed in protest. They couldn't accelerate fast enough. His Me 262, so untouchable moments before, became a sitting duck. Machine gun fire ripped through his fuselage. Smoke filled his cockpit. In seconds, his arrogance burned with his plane, spiraling into the ground beside the very runway he had trusted for safety. This became the Me 262's curse. In the air, it was almost divine. On the ground, or even just too low and too slow, it was mortal. German pilots knew it, but denial is a powerful shield. They continued to mock their enemies, claiming superiority in every dogfight. And yes, many Allied pilots feared the 262. But fear is not paralysis. The Allies learned to outthink what they could not outrun. They bombed the factories that built the jets. They strafed the airfields that sheltered them. They cut off the fuel supplies that fed their engines. And above all, they hunted the jets where they were weakest, when they were helpless against simple prop-driven fighters waiting like vultures. So here lies the paradox. In the sky, the Me 262 was the future. On the ground, it was a liability dragging Germany deeper into defeat. But ask yourself this: if the Reich had solved these flaws sooner, if they had produced Me 262s in numbers large enough to dominate the skies, would the war have taken a darker turn? Could speed and firepower alone have bent history? The Allies feared that answer. And that fear drove them harder, to adapt, to overwhelm, to ensure that the jet's promise remained unfulfilled. The Me-262 should have been a weapon of dominance. On the drawing board, it promised to seize back the skies and strike fear into every Allied crew. In combat, it showed glimpses of that power, blazing through bomber streams, tearing apart formations with a single pass. Yet for every victory, shadows of failure loomed larger. Why? Because the jet arrived too late, in too few numbers, under conditions that made success impossible. Germany in 1944 was not the Germany of 1940. Factories lay in ruins from relentless bombing campaigns. Skilled labor was scarce, fuel supplies dwindled, and even the basic materials needed for advanced engines were running dry. Producing a revolutionary fighter in such conditions was like trying to build a cathedral on sinking sand. The Jumo 004 engines, fragile even under ideal circumstances, were rushed into mass production. Their turbines used inferior alloys, forced by shortages of high-grade metals. The result? Engines that burned out after 20 hours, sometimes less. Pilots knew that every sortie could be their last, not because of enemy fire, but because their own engines might betray them. Then there was Hitler. Obsessed with offense, he demanded the Me-262 be configured as a bomber, the Blitz bomber, capable of striking Allied cities. His vision diverted precious time and resources, crippling the program's momentum. Engineers pleaded, this aircraft was born to be a fighter. It can save the Reich skies. But their voices were drowned in the echo chamber of a dictator's delusion. By the time fighter variants were prioritized, the Allies had already tightened their grip. Even when the jets reached frontline units, the numbers told the story. Only a few hundred Me-262s ever flew combat missions. Compare that to the thousands of Mustangs, Thunderbolts, and Spitfires swarming above Europe. Could a handful of miracle machines turn the tide against such overwhelming force? German pilots clung to hope. Some even believed the jet would be a war winner if deployed earlier. But hope is fragile when reality keeps intruding. Runways were bombed before sorties could launch. Fuel trucks were destroyed before they could reach the aircraft. Spare parts disappeared into the chaos of retreat. And still, there were moments, brief, brilliant flashes, when the Me-262 proved what it could have been. In one sortie, a single jet tore down 5 Allied bombers in minutes, scattering the formation like frightened birds. Allied commanders took notice. They realized that if hundreds of these machines had risen into the sky, the strategic bombing campaign might have faltered. But history does not honor what if. Instead, the Me-262 became a tragic symbol, the right idea at the wrong time. It was the future, unveiled too soon, in the hands of a nation too broken to wield it. Think of the irony. The Allies, who mocked German desperation, suddenly glimpsed their own vulnerability when the jet appeared. And the Germans, who laughed at Allied propeller-driven toys, found themselves laughing less with each passing month as their miracle weapon failed to alter the war's course. By 1945, the Luftwaffe's jet squadrons were stretched thin, their numbers dwindling, their victories unable to slow the inevitable march of defeat. Pilots who once bragged about being untouchable now whispered about engine failures, fuel shortages, and the nightmare of Mustangs ambushing them during landings. In the end, the Me-262 was less a savior than a prophecy of what air combat would become. Its silhouette, its jet engines, its speed, all pointed to a new era. But that era belonged not to Nazi Germany, but to the Allies who would perfect the lessons of jet power after the war. And so, the Me-262 remains not as a triumph of the Reich, but as a warning written in smoke across the skies. Even the greatest technology cannot save a crumbling empire. So let us ask again, what is the value of a miracle if it comes too late? The war ended not with the triumph of the Me-262, but with its silence. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, dozens of jets sat abandoned on airfields, some burned, some stripped for parts, others still gleaming like predators that never had the chance to hunt. To Allied soldiers walking among them, it was like discovering relics from the future scattered across a ruined empire. What they found shocked them. Engineers from the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union examined the Me-262 closely. They dismantled its engines, studied its aerodynamics, and tested its performance. Reports poured in. The jet was revolutionary. Its speed, its firepower, its swept-wing design, all were years ahead of anything the Allies had fielded during the war. The irony was inescapable. Germany had lost the war, yet in defeat, it handed the victors a blueprint for the future. In America, the lessons of the Me 262 shaped the birth of new jet fighters. The Bell P-59 era Comet had been America's first attempt at a jet, but compared to the 262, it was clumsy and underpowered. Engineers quickly realized they had to rethink everything. Soon came the Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star, a direct step into the jet age, its performance echoing what the German Swallow had already proven possible. In Britain, designers of the Gloucester Meteor studied the captured jets, refining their own approach to jet combat. The Meteor had flown during the war, but it had never matched the Me 262 in speed or lethality. Now, with German secrets in hand, its successors became faster, deadlier, and more reliable. And in the Soviet Union? The Red Army seized entire workshops, captured engineers, and spirited away whatever they could. Within years, Soviet jets like the MiG-9 and later the famous MiG-15 would trace their lineage back to the studies of German technology. The Me 262 had not won battles for Germany, but it had shaped the Cold War sky. For the pilots who had flown it, the memory was bittersweet. Some spoke of the exhilaration, the feeling of raw power as the jet roared ahead of all enemies. Others confessed the frustration, the endless engine failures, the ambushes on takeoff, the sense of being given a miracle weapon far too late to matter. Historians debate endlessly. Could the Me 262 have changed the outcome of the war if deployed earlier? If Hitler had not meddled? If Germany had the resources to mass-produce them? But history does not bend for if. What remains is a paradox. The Me 262 was both a failure and a triumph. A failure because it did not save the Reich. A triumph because it set the course of aviation for decades to come. Its legacy lived not in German skies, but in every jet that thundered into the Cold War, chasing supersonic speeds, shaping the arms race that defined the second half of the 20th century. So the laughter that once echoed in Luftwaffe hangars, the mockery of Allied propeller toys, faded into silence. And the awe, the shock, the destruction witnessed by Allied pilots who first encountered the jet, that lingered long after the last Me 262 had fallen silent. And perhaps that is the lesson of the Swallow. That war is not only about who invents the future, but about who can wield it, sustain it, and adapt it in time. The Me 262 gave us a glimpse of tomorrow. But tomorrow belonged to those who survived the night. Now, if you've been captivated by this story, the arrogance, the brilliance, the tragedy of the world's first jet fighter, then you know there are countless more untold stories waiting in the shadows of history. On this channel, we dive deep into the machines, the men, and the moments that shaped our world. If you want to keep exploring with us, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you won't miss the next journey into history's hidden skies. After all, the past is full of lessons, and the future is built on how well we remember them.